Chapter 2. German soldiers filled the streets of Krakow. They marched in their smart gray uniforms with their legs locked straight and thrown out in front of them, the way ducks walk. It was silly, but eerie at the same time. There were so many of them, all marching in time together, their shiny green helmets and polished black jackboots glinting in the sun. Each of the soldiers wore a great coat and a pack on his back, and they carried rifles over their shoulders and bayonets at their sides. I felt small in my little blue woolen jacket and pants and my simple brown cap. There were tanks too, panzers they called them, great rumbling things with treads that clanked and cannons that swiveled on top. We came out to watch. All of us, men, women, and children, Poles and Jews. We stood on the street corners and watched the Germans march through our city. Not all of Poland had fallen. The radio told us Warsaw still held out, as did Brest-Litovsk and Lodz. But the Germans were our masters now, until our allies, the British and the French, arrived to drive them out. The Nazis won't be so bad, an old Polish woman on the sidewalk next to me said as I watched them. I remember the Germans from the World War. They were very nice people. But of course, she could say that. She wasn't a Jew. For weeks we tried to live our lives as though nothing had changed, as though an invading army hadn't conquered us. I went to school every day. My father and uncles and cousins still went to work, and my mother still went to the store. But things were changing. At school, the Polish boys wouldn't play soccer with me anymore, and no Poles or Germans bought shoes from my father's store. Food became scarce, too, and more expensive. Then, one morning, I walked to school and it was canceled, for good, I was told. No school for Jews. The other children celebrated, but I was disappointed. I loved to read, any and all books, but especially books about America, and books about doctors and medicine. I wandered the streets, watching the German soldiers in their tanks, the bread lines that stretched around the block. Winter was coming, and the men and women in line held their coats tight around them and stamped their feet to stay warm. When I went home at lunchtime, my father was there, which surprised me. He usually ate lunch at work. Uncle Mosh was with him, at the table. My mother came out of the kitchen and worried over me. "Are you sick, Yannick?" She put a hand to my forehead. "Why are you home early from school?" "It's closed," I told her, feeling depressed. "Closed for Jews." You see, Uncle Mosh said. He turned to my father, looking worked up. "First they close the schools, next it will be your shoe store. My first shop. And why not? No one will buy from us, with Nazi soldiers telling people, don't buy from Jews." "But if they close the shoe stores, how will you make money?" I asked my father. "Jews are not to make money," Mosh said. "We have ration cards now for food, with J's all over them. J for Jew." "This will pass," my father said. "They'll crack down for a time, and then things will get easier again. It's always the same. We just have to keep our heads down." "Yes," Mosh said. He tapped the open newspaper between him and my father. "Jews must keep their heads down and not look Germans in the face. We can't speak unless spoken to. We can't walk on the main streets of our own city. We can't use the parks, the swimming pools, the libraries, the cinemas." Jews couldn't go to the movie theaters? No, I loved the movies. And the library too? Where would I get books to read if I wasn't allowed to go to school either? I hurried to Mosh's side to see what he was talking about. There, in the paper, were "New rules for the Jews." My heart sank. It was true. No more parks, no more libraries, no more movie theaters. And there was to be a nightly curfew for all Jews, young and old. We were to be in our houses and off the streets by 9:00 p.m. "And armbands with the Star of David on them," Uncle Mosh said. "They're marking us, branding us like the cattle in those American pictures Yannick likes so much. Next time they'll be taking all our money. Mina, tell your husband." "What would you have us do, Mosh?" my mother said, putting her hands on my father's shoulders. "We haven't the money to leave, and even if we did, where would we go?" My father reached up to hold my mother's hand. "We must not lose faith, Mosh. See how easy it is to keep your faith when the Nazis take it away along with everything else," Mosh told him. My father smiled. "Let them take everything. They cannot take who we are." I sat down at the table to eat, and my mother brought out a small tureen of tomato soup, a loaf of bread, and a wedge of cheese. "So little?" I asked. "It's the rationing. The groceries are all closed," Mother said. "We'll make do," my father said. "We were spoiled before, anyway." I hadn't felt spoiled, but I didn't say anything. I just wished the Germans hadn't taken my lunch. Late that night, long after curfew, cries of "fire" woke us. I ran from my bedroom frightened. "What is it?" I cried when I saw my parents in the living room. "Is our building on fire? What do we do?" "No," Father said, "it's the synagogue." The synagogue was the place where we worshipped every Sabbath, and where I was studying for my bar mitzvah. I leaned out the window and saw it down the street engulfed in flames. My father hurried to put his coat over his pajamas to go and help put out the fire, but a loud crack from the street brought me and my parents to the window again. Another man, wearing a coat and pajamas like my father, lay dead in the middle of the street, a pool of darkness spreading beneath him, glinting in the street lights. A German officer stood over him, his pistol still aimed at the dead man. Jews are reminded that under the new rules, anyone caught outside their homes after curfew will be shot on sight, the officer yelled. My father stood in the sitting room, his eyes on the door. My mother put a hand to his chest, then her head to his. Some unspoken communication passed between them, and in a few moments my father took his coat off again and sent me back to bed.